The board believes we need to modernize our approach, my younger sister Catherine announced from behind our grandfather's mahogany desk. She'd been CEO for exactly 16 days, following our father's semi-retirement to chairman. Her first major decision, apparently, was eliminating me. My name is Alexander Morgan. For 23 years, I served as the operational heart of Morgan Vineyards, our family's century-old wine empire in California's Napa Valley. At 45, I never sought the spotlight or corporate accolades. Instead, I focused on what truly mattered, ensuring our 7 estates produced exceptional wines, our 300 employees felt valued, and our reputation remained impeccable among connoisseurs worldwide. Research shows traditional operations are holding us back from reaching younger demographics, she continued, sliding a folder across the desk. We've hired a brand consultant from Constellation Brands to streamline our production methods. I kept my expression neutral as I glanced at the severance agreement. The board she referenced consisted of herself, our father, and 2 business school classmates she'd appointed the previous week. Catherine had always been the charismatic face of Morgan Vineyards, charming investors, hosting lavish tastings, being photographed for wine magazines. Meanwhile, I managed harvests, negotiated with distributors, and maintained relationships with the vineyard workers whose families had tended our vines for generations. The unglamorous foundation that kept us profitable. You'll receive 18 months severance, she added, checking her watch. HR has prepared all the necessary paperwork. I placed my personal items in a box, carefully wrapping the hand-blown glass from our first award-winning vintage. Last to go was a framed photograph of our great-grandfather standing among young vines in 1919, shortly after Prohibition began, the same photograph Catherine had removed from the lobby during her recent aesthetic refresh. "Nothing to say?" she prodded, her designer outfit perfectly coordinated as always. I smiled thinly. Good luck with the Oak Ridge estate harvest. Those Cabernet vines are showing signs of stress. A flicker of uncertainty crossed her face. The Oak Ridge estate was our most prestigious property, and its harvest was 3 weeks behind schedule, a problem she would now face without my expertise. "We'll be fine," she recovered quickly. "The consultant has revitalized vineyards twice this size." I nodded, picked up my box and walked out. 23 years of dedication, dismissed in a 12-minute meeting. What Catherine didn't know, or had forgotten in her rush for control, was that 6 years ago, our father had pulled me aside after a particularly difficult harvest that nearly bankrupted several neighboring vineyards. "Never put all your grapes in one basket, Alex," he'd said, looking out over the valley. "Wine may be in our blood, but land is where the true value resides." It was advice I'd taken to heart, quietly making strategic investments while Catherine collected accolades and industry awards. As I drove away from our family's estate, past rows of vines heavy with nearly ripe fruit, I felt no anxiety, only patience. Patience that would bear fruit when certain contracts came up for renewal in 3 months. I grew up watching my father transform Morgan Vineyards from a respectable local winery into an international luxury brand. While Catherine shadowed him at wine competitions and society events, I preferred walking the vineyards with our field managers, learning how the soil, water, and vines work together to create something extraordinary. By 17, I could predict a harvest's quality by taste testing grapes or identify irrigation issues by examining a single leaf. "Your sister understands the market," my father would say. "But you, Alex, you understand the wine itself." This balance functioned well for decades, until it didn't. As our father aged, Catherine's ambition flourished. She began hiring consultants who produced glossy reports, advocating for mass production techniques and accessibility initiatives. She spoke of celebrity partnerships, tourism expansion, and lifestyle merchandising. Sometimes I wondered if she remembered we were in the business of creating exceptional wine, not marketing experiences. 6 years ago, when our father first mentioned reducing his role, I recognized the inevitable shift coming. During a review of our finances, I noticed something concerning our three most valuable estates, Oak Ridge, Sunnyvale, and La Cresta, all operated on land we leased rather than owned. The original landowners had been elderly when we signed 50-year leases decades ago, and now their heirs were quietly exploring selling options. This represents significant vulnerability, I explained to my father over dinner at his favorite restaurant. If someone acquires these properties and raises our rent, we'd be trapped. He nodded slowly. I'd been meaning to address that, but with the new visitor center in Sonoma taking all our available capital, I could purchase them. I suggested carefully. Personally, then lease back to Morgan Vineyards at the same favorable rates. My father studied me over his reading glasses. That would require substantial personal investment, Alex. I'd been saving, I replied simply, and I believe in what we've built. The following week, he connected me with our family's bank. 4 months later, I owned the land beneath our 3 premier estates through my private holding company. Morgan Vineyards remained the tenant with a 5-year preferential lease agreement that would require renewal. Does Catherine know about this arrangement? My father asked as we signed the paperwork. It's documented in the corporate records, I answered, but she doesn't read those unless absolutely necessary. He chuckled. Your sister sees the wine. You see the vine and the soil it grows in. Someday she'll understand how essential that perspective is. Now, driving home from my last day at Morgan Vineyards, I wondered if that day had finally arrived. I hadn't missed the subtle shifts over the past 18 months. Catherine excluding me from strategic meetings, questioning my vineyard management decisions, reassigning my most experienced staff. The groundwork for today's dismissal had been laid methodically. The morning after being fired, I woke at the same time as always, 4:45 a.m. For over 2 decades, I'd started each day reviewing weather forecasts and field reports, addressing any issues before they could threaten our vines. Today, my phone remained silent. No emergencies, no harvest updates, just stillness. I made coffee and sat on my terrace, overlooking the valley. The morning fog rolled between the hills, steady and predictable. I'd always appreciated its reliability, appearing each dawn, protecting the grapes from early heat, then retreating precisely when the vines needed sunlight. No drama, no recognition needed, just the consistent work of nurturing what grew beneath it. My phone buzzed. A text from Eduardo, our head vintner at Oak Ridge, heard what happened. Their loss. New consultant already making changes to the fermentation schedule, rushing things. Not good for this year's vintage. I sent back a simple acknowledgement, but offered no advice. Not my concern anymore. Another message arrived, this one from my father. Breakfast, Luciano's, 8 a.m. Luciano's was a small cafe near our original vineyard. We hadn't eaten there together in years. When I arrived, he already occupied a corner booth, looking older than I remembered. He nodded as I sat down. She told me after it was done, he said without preamble. I would have handled it differently, but you didn't stop it, I observed. Not a question. He sighed, stirring his coffee. Catherine believes Morgan Vineyards needs to evolve, become more corporate, less family-oriented in its management approach. And you agree? He paused, choosing his words carefully. I think your sister has a vision for growth that the board finds compelling. The waitress brought our usual orders without asking. Black coffee and sourdough toast for him, eggs and fruit for me. Some things remained constant. The land, he said after she left. Catherine doesn't fully understand the lease arrangements. I cut my eggs precisely. The corporate documents explain everything clearly. You know she doesn't read the fine print. He gave me a pointed look. I met his gaze. The renewal comes up soon. 3 months, I confirmed. I've already consulted with my attorney about terms. My father set down his fork. What are you planning, Alex? The question hung between us. In that moment, I realized I'd been anticipating this conversation for years, the quiet, reliable son finally having leverage over the favored daughter. I'd imagined feeling vindicated, perhaps even satisfied. Instead, I just felt tired. Market rate leases, I said finally. Nothing more, nothing less. He nodded slowly. That will significantly impact our operating costs. Yes, I replied evenly. It will. We finished our breakfast in silence. As we stepped outside, he placed his hand on my shoulder. Your sister sees wine as a product to sell, he said. You've always seen it as a legacy to nurture. Don't forget that difference. I watched him walk toward his car, shoulders slightly stooped with age. For the first time, I clearly recognized what had been evident all along. This wasn't simply about Catherine underestimating me. It was about our father enabling a division that had been growing for decades. I returned home and entered my private office. On the wall hung the original survey map of our first vineyard, framed when I purchased the land beneath it. Time to focus on legacies. 2 weeks after my dismissal, Catherine finally called. I let it go to voicemail, then listened to her carefully controlled message. Alex, we need to discuss the transition. Some files seem to be missing. Call me when you can. No apology. No acknowledgement that she'd fired her brother after 23 years of service. Just business as usual. I deleted the message and spent the afternoon meeting with a viticulture specialist I'd been mentoring who was starting his own consulting practice. The next day, Catherine appeared at my home. When I opened the door, she brushed past me into the living room. You're ignoring me, she stated bluntly. I'm respecting your decision to remove me from company business, I replied, remaining standing while she sat uninvited on my sofa. What files have you taken? The supplier contracts? The harvest schedules? The soil composition analyses for Oak Ridge? Everything is in the company drive, I answered calmly, organized by estate and department as it has been for years. Well, your organization system isn't exactly intuitive, she said, crossing her legs, her designer heel tapping with irritation. And your replacement needs context. I poured myself a glass of water without offering her one. My replacement is a branding consultant who has revitalized Vineyards twice our size. I'm sure he can determine how to read a simple file directory. Her eyes narrowed at hearing her own words reflected back. This isn't helpful, Alex. The company needs. I don't work for the company anymore, I interrupted. Remember, Catherine stood, smoothing her immaculate dress. Fine, I'll have legal request the documents formally. Do what you need to do, I said, walking toward the door. Our conversation was finished. A week later, a certified letter arrived from Morgan Vineyards attorneys requesting all documents pertaining to company operations. I forwarded it to my lawyer, who responded with a detailed list of everything already available on company servers and a courteous reminder that personal notes and analyses were my private property. Meanwhile, I began receiving calls from Vineyard employees. The new consultant was implementing efficiency measures, reducing barrel aging times, cutting staff hours, replacing established suppliers with cheaper alternatives. Quality was suffering. Longtime clients were expressing concerns. Rather than satisfaction, I felt a hollow discomfort. These were people I'd worked alongside for years, some of whom represented the third generation of their family to tend our vines. Their livelihoods and heritage were being threatened by my sister's vision and my absence. Then came the email from our property insurance provider, requesting clarification on recent ownership changes affecting 3 key estates. Apparently, Catherine had attempted to update the insurance policies and encountered an unexpected reality. Morgan Vineyards didn't own the land beneath its most valuable properties. I did. I forwarded the email to my attorney without response. The next morning, my father called. Did you know, his voice was tight, that Catherine doesn't read legal documents? Yes. A heavy sigh. She's called an emergency board meeting, claims you've hidden critical information from the company. Nothing was hidden, I replied evenly. Every lease agreement is properly documented. Morgan Vineyards has been paying rent to AMV Holdings for 6 years. Paying you? He sounded genuinely confused. The accounting shows payments to AMV Holdings. Catherine assumed that was a property management company. AMV Holdings, Alexander Morgan Vineyards Holdings. I clarified. My sister had been signing financial statements for years without realizing she was approving payments to her own brother. The board meeting is tomorrow, my father continued. You should attend. I'm not on the board anymore, I reminded him. Alex, his voice softened. This is still our family's legacy. After we hung up, I sat at my desk, turning a century-old pruning knife in my hands, the same tool our great-grandfather had used to tend the first Morgan vines. Family legacy indeed. But families were supposed to protect each other. My attorney called an hour later. Morgan Vineyards lawyers are requesting information about lease renewals. How do you want to proceed? I made my decision. Send them the new terms. Market rate, no special considerations. The Oak Ridge estate spread across 47 acres of perfect hillside terrain, its orderly rows of vines capturing the morning light. I'd personally selected which varietals to plant in each microclimate across the property, creating a seamless ecosystem that produced our most acclaimed wines. Now I sat in my car at a nearby overlook, watching workers move through the vineyard, unaware of the corporate drama unfolding behind the scenes. My phone buzzed with a text from my attorney. They've received the new lease terms, expecting a response by end of week. I knew the numbers would shock them. The preferential rates I'd offered 6 years ago had saved Morgan Vineyards nearly $3 million annually across the 3 properties. The new market rates would eliminate that advantage entirely. As I watched, a familiar black Range Rover pulled into the estate's private drive. Catherine. She wasn't scheduled to visit Oak Ridge today. I remained in my car as she strode into the main building, phone pressed to her ear, gesturing emphatically. Curiosity compelled me to call Eduardo. Your sister's on the warpath, he answered without greeting. Surprise inspection, brought the consultant too. What are they looking for? Property documents, site plans, something about structural assessment. Between us, he lowered his voice. I think they're trying to figure out if they can challenge your ownership claim. After thanking him, I drove to the county records office. Using my laptop, I accessed the original deed transfers, property surveys, and lease agreements. All perfectly legal, all properly filed, as expected. What I didn't expect was what I discovered in the adjacent permit applications. A filing from 2 years ago, submitted by Catherine using her married name. A development permit for a luxury wine resort on undeveloped land adjoining our La Cresta estate. I checked the business entity, Morgan Exclusive Experiences LLC, not Morgan Vineyards, but a separate company with Catherine as the sole proprietor. Further investigation revealed similar permits near Oak Ridge and Sunnyvale, all filed by the same LLC, all for high-end wine tourism developments. The realization struck like a physical blow. While I had been faithfully managing our family's vineyards, Catherine had been planning to launch her own competing hospitality brand, leveraging our family name while keeping ownership entirely separate. She hadn't fired me because she thought I was ineffective. She'd removed me because I stood in the way of her true ambitions. I called my attorney immediately. I need you to investigate a company called Morgan Exclusive Experiences LLC. 3 days later, we had the complete picture. Catherine had been courting investors for her own wine tourism brand for nearly 3 years. Her business plan, which my attorney obtained through a contact, explicitly mentioned leveraging expertise and reputation developed at Morgan Vineyards and targeting affluent visitors already drawn to Morgan Vineyards estates. The morning of the emergency board meeting, I received a call from an unexpected source, James Reynolds, one of Catherine's business school friends who sat on our board. I've seen the lease renewal terms, he said without preamble, and I've heard rumors about Morgan Exclusive Experiences. Not just rumors, I confirmed. A long pause. I respected your father. That's why I joined this board. Another pause. Catherine assured us you were stepping away voluntarily, that you wanted to pursue other opportunities. Did she mention her own other opportunities? A heavy sigh. No, that's why I'm calling. I heard papers shuffling. The board meeting is at 2 o'clock. I think you should know that Catherine is going to propose Morgan Vineyards sell the Oak Ridge, Sunnyvale, and La Cresta estate buildings and operations. claims the new lease terms make them unprofitable. The final piece clicked into place. She wanted Morgan Vineyards to sell the estates so her new venture could acquire them at distressed prices. The buildings and business, not the land, creating a scenario where her new company would become my tenant. "Thank you for telling me," I said. "I didn't tell you anything," James replied, and hung up. I sat very still, letting cold clarity wash through me. This wasn't just business anymore. This was betrayal on a level I hadn't imagined. Instead of attending the board meeting, I drove to San Francisco to meet with Victoria Fraser, CEO of Artemis Wine Group. We'd encountered each other at industry events over the years, and she'd once tried to recruit me. At the time, I'd declined out of loyalty to my family's business. Now that loyalty felt misplaced. "Interesting timing," Victoria remarked as we settled in her office overlooking the bay. "I heard Morgan Vineyards is considering divesting some properties." News traveled quickly in wine circles. 3 estates, I confirmed. Their most prestigious ones. She leaned forward. "And you happen to own the land beneath them?" I nodded, a situation my sister failed to appreciate until recently. Victoria's smile was pure business. "So what exactly are you proposing, Alex?" "A partnership. Artemis acquires the estates when Morgan Vineyards sells. I maintain land ownership, but offer preferential lease terms to you." I slid a folder across her desk containing detailed financials, production histories, and my proposal. While Victoria reviewed the documents, I gazed out at the Golden Gate Bridge. 23 years at Morgan Vineyards, and I'd never had an office with a view like this. Catherine had insisted the best spaces were needed for media interviews, and her own office, always the face of the company, always center stage. "These estates fit perfectly with our expansion strategy," Victoria said finally. "But I'm curious, why not simply raise the rent and force your sister to keep operating them? You'd make more money." "Because she's already planning to launch a competing business," I explained. "One that would directly target Morgan Vineyards' market while siphoning away its prestige." Her eyebrows rose. "While still running Morgan Vineyards? That's ambitious." "That's one word for it," I replied neutrally. I believe her plan was to devalue these properties, have Morgan Vineyards sell them, then acquire them through her new venture at reduced prices. "With you as her landlord," Victoria chuckled. "Awkward. I prefer choosing my business partners more carefully." I met her gaze directly. "Artemis has a reputation for retaining staff during acquisitions. That matters to me." Victoria studied me for a long moment. "Family businesses are complicated," she said finally. "This isn't about family anymore," I replied. "It's about doing right by the people who've devoted their lives to these vineyards." 2 days later, Artemis's legal team began drafting acquisition proposals. Meanwhile, I contacted Eduardo and other key staff at the 3 estates, discreetly informing them of potential changes and assuring them their positions would be secure. The news broke faster than anticipated. A wine industry blog published speculation about Morgan Vineyards' financial difficulties and Artemis's interest in their premier estates. Catherine's response was immediate, a company-wide email denying any plans to sell properties and reaffirming Morgan Vineyards' strong market position. Then my father called, his voice weary. The board rejected her proposal to sell. "Good," I said simply. "She's furious. Says you're undermining the company." He paused. "She found out about your meetings with Artemis." I remained silent. "Alex," he sighed. "What are you trying to accomplish here?" The question hung between us, heavier than he realized. What was I trying to accomplish? Revenge, justice, or something more fundamental? A reckoning long overdue. "I'm protecting what I've nurtured," I answered finally. "The same way you taught me." 3 weeks later, Morgan Vineyards stock dropped 14% following a quarterly report showing declining revenue and quality concerns from key distributors. The same day, I received a formal request from the board, minus Catherine, for a meeting to discuss strategic alternatives for challenged estates. My attorney and Victoria's team prepared meticulously for the meeting. When the day arrived, I walked into Morgan Vineyards' conference room for the first time since my dismissal. Catherine sat at the head of the table, face tight with barely controlled anger. Our father sat to her right, looking every bit his 72 years. Board members filled the remaining seats, expressions carefully neutral. I took my position at the opposite end, opened my portfolio, and waited for the opening move. "Let's be clear about what's happening here," Catherine began. Her voice clipped. "My brother is attempting a hostile takeover of the company our father built." "Incorrect," I replied calmly. "I'm simply exercising my rights as a property owner. Artemis Wine Group is interested in acquiring estates Morgan Vineyards no longer wishes to maintain, given the new lease terms." James Reynolds cleared his throat. "The board never approved selling those properties. The board was presented with misleading information," I countered, sliding folders to each member. "These documents show that while serving as CEO of Morgan Vineyards, Catherine was simultaneously developing a competing wine tourism business targeting the same markets." The room fell silent. My father's face drained of color as he opened his folder. "This is absurd," Catherine sputtered. "Morgan Exclusive Experiences is a marketing initiative, not a competing business. With permit applications at 3 sites adjoining our estates, I finished for her, and a business plan explicitly stating its intention to leverage expertise and reputation developed at Morgan Vineyards." Our father turned to her, betrayal evident in his expression. "Is this true?" Her silence provided the answer. I continued. "Artemis's offer exceeds market value for these estates. It includes guarantees to retain all current staff and maintain the quality standards that have defined Morgan wine for generations." I paused. Something Catherine's venture had no intention of honoring. "You've been planning this for years," she accused, voice shaking. "Buying the land, waiting to spring your trap." "No," I corrected. "I bought the land to protect our family's legacy. You're the one who decided I wasn't part of that legacy anymore." The board voted unanimously to accept Artemis's offer, with one abstention, our father, who sat motionless throughout the proceedings. As the meeting concluded, Catherine stormed out without a word. James approached me afterward. "The board will be requesting Catherine's resignation tomorrow," he said quietly. "We'll need interim leadership while we restructure." I shook my head. "That won't be me. I've made other arrangements." 1 year later, I stood among the vines at the former Oak Ridge estate, now the crown jewel of Artemis's California collection. The property had been renamed Monarch Hill, but much remained unchanged. Eduardo still oversaw the winemaking. Most of the staff had stayed, and the vines continued producing exceptional fruit under their care. Victoria joined me, glass in hand, sampling the first vintage produced under Artemis's stewardship. "Excellence," she pronounced. "You were right about this terroir's potential." As consulting director for Artemis's California properties, I worked primarily behind the scenes, advising on vineyard management, mentoring staff, ensuring quality standards. No executive office, no press interviews, no board politics, just the wine itself, which was all I'd ever truly cared about. "Have you seen your father?" Victoria asked carefully. I nodded. "Weekly dinners. He's adjusting to retirement." After the acquisition, he'd stepped down from Morgan Vineyards entirely. The company still operated 4 estates, though none produced wines of the caliber that the Artemis properties now did. "And your sister?" "Morgan Exclusive Experiences filed for bankruptcy protection last month," I said without satisfaction or regret. Turns out wine tourism requires more than ambition and a business degree. We stood in comfortable silence watching the sun set over the vineyard. Eventually, Victoria left for another meeting, and I remained alone with my thoughts. My phone buzzed with a text from my father. "Dinner tonight, bringing the grandchildren." I smiled and confirmed. My niece and nephew weren't responsible for their mother's actions, and I'd ensured my relationship with them remained intact throughout the corporate turbulence. As twilight deepened, I walked between rows of vines, running my fingers over leaves that had matured under my guidance for over 2 decades. These plants would continue producing exceptional fruit long after all the human drama surrounding them had been forgotten. In the end, that's what Catherine had never understood. Success wasn't about who received the accolades or who had the most impressive title. It was about creating something enduring, something that would continue to thrive long after we were gone. I plucked a perfectly ripe grape and tasted it thoughtfully, ready for harvest. Tomorrow, I would inform the vineyard manager. Some vintages are remembered for their exceptional quality. Others are remembered for the lessons they teach. Both have value in their own way, just like family members. I turned away from the vines and headed toward my car. Time to prepare for dinner, with the parts of family worth preserving.